I've been recently turned on to a channel called Warren Smith Secret Scholar Society. Some of the conversations that take place on this channel are particularly interesting, and so I thought we'd look at one of his recent uploads today.
There's something important here, and my hope is that through the examination of the logic, what is important will reveal itself.
I've said Jesus Christ is king, and many other people have said Jesus Christ is king because we believe that Jesus Christ is king. But that is certainly not the only usage that we've all observed on X. To pretend otherwise is ridiculous.
So if you imagine this chart, we have the ocean, we have boats floating on the surface of the ocean. The boats are the words. Everything beneath the surface of the ocean is subtext. What we're trying to articulate with the words, if the words are tools.
It's like asking, how does a shovel become a murder weapon when it is used to murder someone? This isn't hard. A shovel is not innately a murder weapon. Saying Christ is king is not innately anti-Semitic. It's all about how a thing is used.
So if you're working with an actor, directing an actor in a movie scene, they're more interested in this than they are the words spoken in the scene. What is my motivation? What do I want in the scene? What am I trying to accomplish? So this is what is more important, what you say or what you do, how you behave, how you live, your decisions.
There's been this whole Christ is king debate. Is that anti-Semitic to say it? Is the connotation, at the very least, anti-Semitic? So that's what the space was about.
And how words, depending on what's beneath, can change meaning with what.
And depending on who's saying them as well, which is what we're about to highlight.
What line can we define? How about imposing your religion on anyone else, telling them that their freedom of religion, compelling speech, compelling them to say what you want them to say, using this, saying that you must believe with what I believe, even if that's what you believe. You don't get to impose that on them and say you have to declare this king. All must bend the knee, which is literally the words I've been hearing. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence. And I would argue that that's why freedom of speech is important, is because it allows consequence to occur, rather than censoring speech and removing the consequence from ever being able to occur. Because
It's a brilliant articulation, not only because it's accurate, but because it uses similar terminology that is harnessed by censorious forces on the left. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom without consequence. The people who tend to use that line of reasoning are on the left, and many of them tend to advocate for the restriction of speech. So what's the best way to convey that that isn't actually what they want? To show that allowing free speech actually enables consequence to occur. Perfectly put. Let's continue.
let's take a look at some examples of that space when this can become problematic.
I don't like that guys like Shapiro will not say Christ is King, America first. I think they forfeit their ability to lead.
Okay, so when Nick Fuentes in that space, this came up to Jeremy Boring.
This is good.
So because Shapiro will not say Christ is King, of course he's not going to say it. He's Jewish. That's not his belief, and he has every right to believe and to choose whatever God he wishes to choose.
Yep.
The argument that's being presented here is that now negates your ability to have a leadership position.
And as long as guys like Shapiro cannot say Christ is King and they refuse to say America first, I think it's notable Ben Shapiro has never uttered those words. I don't think they should have leadership in America.
Okay, so a government under Nick Fuentes would require, by that logic, compelled speech. You would have to say what he wants you.
Precisely, to elevate to that position of power as a leader within the government under a Fuentes regime, which is a truly horrifying prospect, I might add, would require people who don't even believe in such an utterance to say that. Now, I have a video coming out soon on Candace Owens' departure from the Daily Wire and all of the things that she said in the past that could be perceived as anti-Semitic and have been perceived as anti-Semitic. And my question is, what is Candace Owens' angle? What is the reason that she is saying Christ is King? It's hard to know. This isn't, you sort of have to look at a full body of work. Is her use of the term Christ is King exactly the same as Nick Fuentes saying it. Absolutely not. And Candace Owens' position definitely has separation from Nick Fuentes on a variety of different issues. I also don't think it's fair to hold Candace Owens accountable for the way that Nick Fuentes views her on the issue of Israel, which is quite positive at this point, because Nick Fuentes tends to have very negative views toward Israel and toward Jews in general. But even though their behaviors are similar along one dimension, does not entail us treating her as if she is the same as him, or that his praise reflects badly upon her. Similar kind of thing happened with Trump. You had people on the far right come out in support of Trump, mainly for his stances on immigration. And people on the left were starting to hold Trump accountable for the fact he was receiving support from ethno-nationalists. Is that totally fair to lump him in the same category? I don't think so. But it's also noteworthy to recognize. The fear from people is that your own advocacy for a position and the response that it generates from maleficent forces is actually a dog whistle, which is an assumption. You're claiming to be able to read the mind of the person uttering the remarks, but that might not be what that person's intention is.
To say in order to even have a leadership position in government. You would have to say America first, and you would have to bow to the God that he wants you to bow to. So logically, don't argue to me that you're pro free speech if you're going to make a statement like that.
And that's very key. People on the right, like Nick Fuentes, want to have their cake and eat it too. Any kind of support for compelled speech indicates that free speech does not matter to you in principle. It's merely being wielded as a tool to further your own agenda.
Also, there's an interesting contradiction here where he's actually advocating for the fact that he's able to hire and fire and make decisions on his organization. He goes on in that same conversation to say, I would never hire someone for my organization who would not say these things. So it's okay for you to make hiring decisions based on whether or not you agree. But it's not okay for the Daily Wire or for others. So it's full of logical contradictions here. Mm-hmm. And this is, I'm not trying to interject my opinion in any of this because logic does stand alone. Let's take a look at some of the top, there was 2 video responses that I've seen thus far from Lauren Chin. I think there's actually more than that. Let's look at the top 2 comments on those videos and examine them through the question of, does this qualify? Even if it's not anti-Semitic, does this fall within that threshold of how a phrase such as Christ is King can be problematic? So the question is this problematic? In the Old Testament, individual Jews still choose or didn't choose salvation. The idea that they don't need to make that choice now and are on some pedestal is ridiculous. You're imposing that a certain religion needs to say what you want them to say. If it's not voluntary, is the journey real? If they just say, if I can just convince them, if I just hammer them enough to where they will bend the knee and say the words that I want them to say, does that hold the same value as them going on the journey themselves and coming to that?
No, although the ability to stand up to that pressure and remain true to one's convictions, despite threat of violence, is evidence that they are truly sincere about what they believe. If they're willing to sacrifice their own corpus, that's how you know it's serious. Judaism has a long history with false prophets, false messiahs. And one of the most famous ones is a man named Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi was around in I believe, the 17th century. In the middle of the 17th century, this guy amassed a large following, and people thought that he was the Messiah. He was captured by the Ottomans, and the Ottomans pressured him to convert to Islam. And when faced with that pressure, he did. He bent the knee. And that's how a lot of people determined that he was, in fact, not the Messiah, because the Messiah wouldn't have bent the knee.
To that conclusion themselves, how then do you get them to go on that journey. Because it's one thing for me to say, hey, this has worked really well for me. It could work well for you, and to leave it at that. But if you cross beyond that threshold, that's something different. It's similar to when we're working with students. If you tell a student you have to do this because I say so. Or you lead through example, you show them why doing that assignment is necessary, why it's important to be able to think. Or you just tell them you need to do this, point blank. You're going to have two very different outcomes.
And what I said is that when you get these people who believe in this esoteric stuff and they really are devil worshippers, I said, these are people that you got to give the death penalty. I said, when it comes to, like, when I see these drag artists at the Padres thing and they're doing a dance on the crucifix and stuff like that, to me, that's satanic.
I mean, that's a pretty glaring example, but it's interesting to me because when you hear a statement like that, Lauren Chin doesn't say a word. She just sips her water and keeps listening.
And this is actually why I was initially drawn to make this video, what he's about to explain.
So the choosing of outrage is what's interesting
with
here.
Some people, there's...
The choosing of outrage. The choosing to call out one side of the political spectrum. If you're on the right, you don't call out your own side as much because there's this team mentality. If you're on the left, same thing. Because we're supposed to be fighting the evil forces from outside. To expand a little bit more upon this point, one of the difficulties with calling out your own side is you might not possess the same expertise on the subjects critical of your side than you would for the subjects critical of your opponent's positions. This is enough of an obstacle to prevent someone from speaking. And that could be, theoretically, one of the issues that Lauren Chen is facing in this instance. She might want to object. She might know that there's something wrong within Nick Fuentes' statement, but she is not used to objecting to opinions put forth by the right.
To convince him that he's wrong, that's not going to work.
Well, you do what you can, for example, and this is what I can do. The choosing when to be confused. So TYT, for example, when we play that clip, and they say, huh? As though, it seems to me that normally if you were to post, if someone who is black makes a post on Twitter and someone then says, go eat some cornbread, in the comment, TYT would have a problem with that. Yeah. But here they choose to be confused, it seems like.
Saying eat some cornbread is not racist if I say it to my 3-year-old when she's refusing her dinner. If I say it as a response to X posts by black commentators, I don't like it. It has taken on a meaning beyond what is innate. Okay?
That's so bizarre. I don't have the full context of the TYT clip, but if they're acting as if they don't understand the point being made by Jeremy in that tweet, the very people who complain about the connotative wielding of language are not above using it themselves.
Where everything's going great, but you're not being reasonable. You're being ridiculous. Give me a thank you. Give me a thank you for feminists for getting your right to vote. Otherwise, stop voting and go make me a ham sandwich.
Which from a psychological perspective, if I'm just reading into it, actually indicates just how much of the left's reaction is the product of projection. That these people are so outraged by the types of things that are being said because it actually reflects badly about the types of things that they have said, the types of mentalities that they have. They are guilty about themselves, and they express that guilt instead of looking inward and figuring out what have I said in the past? What am I guilty of? They blame everyone else on the other team.
The CEO of Papa John's.
I don't care about the CEO of Papa John's.
Let's conduct this thought experiment, please. I think it'll be valuable. The CEO of Papa John's in a Zoom call, they're thinking of hiring a public figure. I think you believe it was a rapper. He goes around saying the N-word a lot. The CEO of Papa John's says, I don't want to hire this individual because he goes around saying the N-word. In that Zoom call, he actually said the N-word, right? He was then fired and every effort was made to destroy him, as though he made the statement, he said the N-word in the context with the intent of being racist. But he was actually trying to say, it's not good to say this, and that's why I don't want to hire them. Okay, so Now, I'm not going to say what's right or wrong, whether that was right or wrong. Hang on one second. If you find that problematic, that removing the intent behind that statement, and that he should just saying the words themselves are enough to destroy someone regardless of intent, how is that different than saying if we remove it, that intent does not correlate to a statement, whether it's Christ is King or pineapple on pizza or whatever it is, that statement devoid of intent is always right. Devoid of intent, it doesn't matter. If a statement can always be right, it can logically also always be wrong. Another statement can always be wrong. So that's the logic that leads to actions similar to those that were surrounding the CEO of Papa John's. So if you find something like that problematic, we need to be logically consistent and see that how we arrive at treating speech in that way. And how do we arrive there? It's removing the intent, saying that intent doesn't matter. It's either always right or it's always wrong. There's no such thing as context or the intent behind the words, which goes back to that chart and why it's so important to recognize that words are not the end-all be-all. They're just the tools that we're wielding. How are we wielding those tools? Which is what Jeremy Boring's point was about a shovel is a shovel. If you use it to kill someone, it then becomes a murder weapon. How we wield the tools. And so how our decisions are so important, because how we use that speech, how we use that phrase is going to determine how it is viewed. So Black Lives Matter is now viewed as something more than just saying that Black lives are valuable because of how it has been wielded.
Excellent ending. So much of my emphasis on this channel in de-radicalizing the factions of either side is talking about language. In the case of Candace Owens, is there enough in her past stances that she's taken toward other figures, like Kanye, for example, that would indicate that she's making these kinds of declarations with reference to Jews with ancillary intentions? Now, I actually don't happen to think that Candace Owens herself is anti-Semitic. I don't personally view her like that. However, what she is willing to do is she's willing to exploit the power and controversy of a statement in order to generate more attention and attract people on her side. Candace Owens is an opportunist. Candace Owens is not an anti-Semite, but Candace Owens is willing to say things that are inevitably going to be interpreted as anti-Semitic, because that's the society we live in order to drum up outrage, to generate attention toward herself, and to further her career. Those two are different, because she won't be the one that would ever do anything directly condemnable to Jews. She will be the one who will stand by and will be indifferent to wrongdoing against Jewish people. There's some nuance here, and I understand why the Daily Wire wanted to separate themselves from her. I also think the way they went about doing this, the indirect approach, the fact they dodged interview questions like Ben Shapiro on Piers Morgan.
Was she fired, or did she leave of her own volition?
I'm not going to speak to this topic, Piers.
At all?
At all. I mean, you can ask.
No, I'm not. You can ask why you don't want to say anything.
Again, you can ask.
The way this whole thing fell out was not a good look for them. And at this point, there are folks on the left who are not anti-Semitic, but they are pro-Palestine in their orientation, who don't understand the full context of Candace Owens and are looking at the Daily Wire's actions as hypocritical, as an organization that supposedly stands on principles of free expression and plurality, but who aren't willing to stand by those convictions when one of their hosts is saying things that they don't like. Those are my thoughts.